You're listening to the Sass Says podcast. I'm your host, Christy Rocha, also known as Sass. I identify as a woman, a wife, and a mother. That should tell you a lot already. And over the last few years, I've learned the value of talk therapy. I have seen how my inner work not only enhances my own well-being, but also my marriage, my parenting, my relationships. And in fact, you wouldn't be hearing this right now if it weren't for the work I've done. My mission is to debunk the misconceptions and stigmas around what therapy is and who it's for. Let's normalize working on our mental health and seeking help when needed. We've all heard of self-care, self-help, and self-love, but do you often wonder how to actually make it all happen? I do. You'll hear strategy-based conversations with professionals, as well as inspiring and validating stories from women who are just like you and me. Think of this podcast as the weekly therapy sessions you didn't know you needed, with a dash of sass, a lot of vulnerability, and me, relentlessly asking, but how? Hello. Dr. Kristen Casey is on the show today. Dr. Kristen is a clinical psychologist, published author, content creator, founder and owner of her own private practice and consultation company. Prior to her psychology career, she was an EMT for 5 years. Yes, we talk about it. Her clinical training focused on health psychology, which sparked her interest in sleep, anxiety, and a dedication to utilizing modalities that are rooted in science and research. Dr. Kristen is most known on social media for providing mental health and wellness content about insomnia, anxiety, and gender sexuality concerns. Yes, okay. So, Dr. Kristen Casey, it just all flows together like one name so nicely, doesn't it? Anyway, we discuss her therapist journey, as always, how she got here, why, all the things. We talk about sleep disorders, what she calls a harm reduction approach, all the things we are doing to sabotage our sleep, what are the things we can do to change our sleep habits and patterns, and how sleep is treated in our culture and the impact that that has on each of us individually in our sleep habits, patterns, etc. We also talk about social media, what it's like being a therapist on social media, her personal code of ethics, and just so much more on that front. You know I love that conversation, so I won't keep you from it a second longer. Here's Dr. Kristen. Hey, Dr. Kristen Casey, how are you? Thanks for being here.
Christy, it's so good to see you. So good to be here.
It's funny. I'm sure I'm not alone in this, but before I meet someone either in person or virtually, I just always think of them in my head as like their full Instagram handle.
Me too. Me too. I had to get the words out. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you are Dr. Kristen Casey.
I love it.
Just in my mind. Anyway, all right. So you are here. My show is about mental health therapy. You know the deal. I usually like to start by understanding a little bit more about you and why you do what you do. So why get into this field?
It's a really long story, and I'll try to make it as concise as possible. But I feel like I fell into the field, and when I say that, I never thought I would graduate high school. I never thought I would really go to college. My life plan looked a little different than this. I was an EMT on an ambulance as my first career, and I thought I was going to do that forever. I loved that job so much. I still kind of miss it sometimes, but I love my job now. So I was doing that ambulance thing. I made some really, really good friends. And then I kept thinking to myself, I'm not connecting with people really deeply. And that's truly what I want. And I want to see people heal. And I really want to help people in a different space. So I was thinking about becoming a board certified behavior analyst and working with kids with intellectual disabilities. That's another one of my, one of my favorites. I don't do that now, but so I worked in group homes for a little bit. And yeah, I moved to Arizona and I was like, let me just try to get into this doctorate program and just see how the cookie crumbles. So I didn't even have a plan really. I just was really hoping to, I don't know, stay in school because it was a point of stability for me. I ended up getting into a clinical psychology program and falling in love with psychology. I've always liked it, but I feel like I really dug my feet in the ground with the program. I took it really seriously. I was studying, my husband was like, are you okay? This is not like you. I'm like, I am so jazzed about this. So that's kind of how it started and how it's going. I own a private practice now and I'm on social media, obviously. So my whole goal is so that people don't feel as alone, whether that's in the therapy room or on social media or in life.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So I'm going to go back a moment.
Mhm.
If you don't mind sharing, curious, why you thought you wouldn't even graduate high school or college.
Yeah, I dealt with a lot of trauma as a child and young person, so I just always thought I wasn't good enough, to be honest. Like that was one of my core beliefs, like you're not good enough, or you'll never make something of yourself. My parents were supportive, but they didn't do the whole school thing, so they just didn't really know how to help me and how to support me. They're wonderful people though, and yeah, and going through all that, I was just like, oh, maybe I'll just work, which was fine with me. I really was okay with any outcome, but I didn't really give myself the opportunity to try. And when I did, I was shocked at how I could do it, with
Hmm.
college and stuff.
Hmm. I'm curious about that, and I ask because it's not just to get to know you better, but because so much of what I go through and I talk with people about on the show is feeling the pressure of like those mile markers at
Oh
that point
yeah.
in
Oh
life
yeah. Hmm.
and really at one point feeling very driven by them. And then you get to the end of those mile markers and you're like, well, what do I do now? And
What
it's,
now?
yeah. And
Yeah.
that's a pretty opposite experience and feeling of, I don't even know if I'll ever do any of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You see, that's a good point though, because I think for me that was a protective factor in at like for me after I graduated, because I felt like there's more to life than my studies or my achievements. And I
Okay.
think a lot of people do struggle with who am I outside of being a mom, or who am I outside of being a therapist, and
Yeah.
I think it is hard for people, but I think that was really helpful for me in terms of, at least right now, I'm like
Yeah.
really leaning into the fact that I have a job, but I am not my job.
Yeah. Yeah. And then an EMT. Wow. How long were you an EMT?
5 years.
Five. So pretty opposite, I would imagine. Like you're kind of dealing with, unfortunately, I would imagine a lot of like last moments.
Totally
Yeah.
saw a lot of unfortunate events. Also was able to save a lot of people, which was great. Like, being there for people in their, most vulnerable moments. I would only hope that if I was in that position, I would have someone there. So I think that's kind of how I guided things. And to be honest, it really did help me in my clinical psychology studies, because life is so fragile,
Mhm.
not to get existential or anything, but it just
Yeah.
it is fragile. So I think that really did help guide me as I'm in the therapy room with people, because you'll never get that moment ever again. Like that therapy moment will never happen ever again, like that specific moment. So I do
Yeah.
cherish those moments too. That's kind of what I
Yeah.
took from being an EMT.
Yeah. That's interesting because I was thinking of it as, you know, yes, you're helping someone as an EMT, but then you're basically, and correct me if I'm wrong, but then you're passing them off,
No,
right?
you're
For like
completely right.
for
Yeah.
the rest of their healing potentially. And it's
Yeah.
kind of just like I can like not knowing what happens. Like
I know.
to
It's
not know what you
scary.
don't know what happens. Like that's crazy. Whereas what you do now, you see someone through probably like just an entire journey. Like that's just yeah, okay.
Totally. Actually, I never really thought of it that way, like the differences, because you're right. With EMS, you are there during like the height of things and you're just trying to get people stable. And then when you drop them off at the hospital, even with HIPAA, like I don't ever know like if they
Yeah.
make it, So
Yeah.
I think that's the difference. And I guess if I really reflect, a lot of my experience has been in crisis, inpatient, like those high stress, situations. And now I do private practice. So it's way more common inpatient, and I'm
Mhm.
really loving it. It's so
Yeah.
different though. I'm really glad you brought up the differences, because I hadn't thought of it that way.
Yeah. All right. So now I'm curious, you specialize in sleep disorders, insomnia, things like that, anxiety. Why focus in on sleep disorders and insomnia?
Yeah, this is another one that I fell into. I didn't want to do sleep. I like fought it for a while. So I'll give you the quick story, but I was in my internship. When you become a clinical psychologist, you have to do an APA accredited internship to graduate. And I was in my internship, and my supervisor was like, obsessed with sleep. She was like the sleep queen. And I'm like, listen, I'm not doing that sleep group. Like I'll do anything else. Like I'm not doing the sleep group. Like it's literally gonna put me to sleep. I don't want to do it. And she's like, great, I'll see you tomorrow. Better reason to do it. So I was like, okay, great. I guess this is a challenge, which is good. It's what we have to do in school and training. I got to the sleep group, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I was working with a bunch of veterans. So I was really intimidated,
Mm,
because they'll tell you how it is. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
they knew that I didn't ever do sleep treatment. I was a trainee and all that. So I was just honest with them. And I said, hey, I don't really know the tenets of sleep. So I'm here to learn with you. And my supervisor will be there. Christy, I ended up falling in love with the sleep group like week 3. I just was like, oh my gosh, people are getting better so fast.
Mm,
Veterans who have had sleep issues for years have gotten
mm.
better in like 3 weeks. The results were undeniable,
Wow.
So after that, I just started to really lean in. And then I was asking my supervisor, can I do more sleep groups? And that's kind of how it started.
And she was like, aha.
Yeah, she's like, see, I was like, I'm glad the people who have been on earth longer than us, we should trust what they say sometimes. So I
Yes.
was just like, okay, you got this.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I think I would pee my pants having to work with veterans, especially.
Right?
Like are they willingly in that situation, would they be willingly signing up for that group?
Most of them
Or
are.
okay,
Most of them
at
are,
least
and
that.
yeah, most of them were willing, and then some of them, Christy, were just at their wits' end. Like they've tried medication, they've tried all these things, and the funny thing about veterans, after I worked at the VA for quite a bit, and they're so. I love veterans. They're like they have a tough exterior, but then when you get to know them, they will like do anything for you. Like they're
Yeah.
very kind to people. So it was a really fun dynamic and really fun group to at least for my first sleep group.
Yeah. I'm sure this is a whole podcast of this question, but when you say that they were, getting better so quickly, what were the types of things that either you were facilitating or that group was
Mhm.
facilitating that was impacting them so greatly in such a short period of time?
Yeah. So the treatment that we did was cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which is a first line
Okay.
treatment for chronic insomnia. So insomnia lasting more than 3 months. Acute insomnia is shorter than that, like jet lag and stuff like that. So jet lag and really acute insomnia episodes are usually treated with over the counters or medication. People with chronic insomnia, it's usually a couple of things. So the first is usually behaviors that they're engaging in that aren't so helpful for sleep, even though we think they're helpful. And the
Okay.
second thing is usually anxiety, usually. So
Okay.
for people laying in bed, their mind is just going and they don't know how to stop it. So we did a lot of interventions to address the worry or the anticipation or the stress in bed. We did a lot of things
Mm,
to change people's beliefs about sleep. Some people had beliefs about sleep that just weren't helpful to induce sleep. So they might say, "I'll sleep when I'm dead," or like, "I don't need
yeah.
sleep," and stuff like that. And the military doesn't really help with that too,
Right.
just people who are deployed. And then the other thing that we did too is keep a lot of sleep data. So I think that's really what helped people get better the most. It was those 3 things, because the sleep data every single week they would have to come in and we would present it with their consent, of course, and we would see the trends, and they wanted to like compete with each other. Like, oh, I got better sleep this week, or I got better sleep this week, like it was so fun. But
It's funny.
they're like, my sleep efficiency score is 82 and yours is only 70. Like it was so cute to watch. But we would put it on the PowerPoint and then they would actually notice the changes. And I think when patients know that they're getting better, they feel like they're getting better, and then they're more
Mhm.
willing.
Mhm.
They're buying into the treatment. So I think those things helped.
Mhm. Cool. All right. I think actually what I want to do is, you know, how do you define insomnia? Is that like the main one? I know there are a ton of sleep disorders. Like, is that like the main one that you would say
Yeah.
primarily you're working on?
I specialize in insomnia. There's over 70 sleep disorders. So insomnia is the one that I focus on the most, and basic sleep stuff, but there
Yeah.
are other ones like restless leg syndrome. Like there's all these other ones, but
Okay.
the crux of insomnia is difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, waking up before your intended alarm, and dissatisfaction with the quality of your sleep. It's usually
Okay.
those four, at least 3 times a week for at least 3 months. That's
Okay.
kind of like the framework that we use. People could vary, that's just kind of a generalization, but
Okay. Because I just think, and I ask because I feel like, it's one of those phrases that could get thrown around a lot,
yeah, sure.
like you
Yeah.
just didn't get a good night's sleep. It's like, well, I have insomnia. It's like,
Yep.
I don't know if you
Yeah,
do
yeah.
or you
I'm
don't.
I'm really glad you brought that up though. And I think there are people out there who love labels and categorizing their issues. And I think it is helpful. And we're actually, I mean, research shows we're just not really good historians when it comes to our sleep health. So
Mm,
if we look back, I'm sure if you look back on the past week, you probably couldn't tell me like the exact times that you fell asleep, the exact times that you woke up, unless you have like events that are happening, like my baby woke me up at this time or something like that. But if you're just
yeah.
a solo human, just kind of doing your thing with no outside environmental issues, it is kind of hard to say, oh, that was a good night of sleep or not, because with the sleep data that we use, we categorize all of those things, like when you fell asleep, when you woke up, how many awakenings you had, how long did they last,
Mhm.
did you wake up before your alarm, all those things. And it gives us a score that just helps people discern, oh, that actually wasn't that bad of a night's sleep. but it wasn't so great either, because
Right.
most people like the black and white, like it was horrible or it was great.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. In having kids and the pandemic and just aging, God,
I know. I know.
I'm on like the whole self-development like
Mhm.
journey. I'm on the road.
Love it.
And like there are so many things that I'm working on and I have to get to the point sometimes where I say, I can't work on everything all the time.
Mhm.
And sleep is one of those things that's like always on the list. And it's on the list because in that journey, I just,
I know what you mean. I'm
it's
with
just
you.
like um, anxiety, depression, um, having to get up and be with the kids. My schedule's
Oh,
not my
yeah.
own, body image, nutrition, all of
Yep.
that. Like there's always a tie to sleep.
Mhm. There is. Yeah, there
And
really is.
it's which is so critical, but I think and we're going to get into all of that, but I think actually where I want to ask you right now is like is there anything that sleep can't help? Like, you know what
I
it
know what
just
you
feels like
mean.
sleep is like everything and it's like sometimes that
I
pressure
know.
is like too much. It's
It is. It is, because I think when people feel the pressure of here's like how I conceptualize the issue, right? Just say for moms, it's a really good example for moms, because there's a lot of like a lack of autonomy and all that stuff. So I think for moms, you could do everything that you can and you're still at the mercy, right, of your kid
yeah.
schedule, your partner, all that stuff, work, all that stuff. So I think for moms, it is really, really difficult. And then if you think about other people just in the world, right, there's a lot of things out of our control. So the sleep issue feels so weird and vulnerable and almost unattainable, because there's all of these things that are outside of our control. So I
Mhm.
think people really want to focus on it, but they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And I think to be honest with you, Christy, a lot of it is acknowledging, wow, there are a lot of things that are outside of my control. And from like a harm reduction approach, how am I going to make my sleep better by like 5 or 10% like this week or this day?
Mhm.
It's really like just a really slow process. And I think people do get overwhelmed with like, oh my gosh, my baby's, I'm waking up all the, every other hour, and how am I going to get sleep? It's almost like setting expectations, right? And all that, because it's almost impossible. But to answer your question, yes, sleep in my mind is the pulse of our life. If our sleep is off, it's likely that something else is off. And it could be anything. It could be something out of your control, like dealing with discrimination at work, or it could be within your control, like staying up too late watching TV, and you could easily turn the TV off even though you want to watch the show. So,
Or scroll TikTok.
or scroll TikTok. Yeah, I wasn't gonna say it because that's what I do, but I was gonna out myself.
Yeah, like the are you scrolling again
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
messages and I'm like, "Oh, fine."
Whenever I get those in my mind, I'm like, okay, Kristen, if you get those, like you have to get off the app. So I got
Same.
one of those last night and I was like, oh, it's time.
Same.
Yeah.
Same. Yeah, and I think I heard you say on I listened to your interview with Dr. Courtney, the Human First
I love that.
podcast.
That was a fun podcast. Yeah.
Um and there was something that you said that just like struck me about all of this is, you know, you said something like I'm paraphrasing.
Mhm.
If you're tired in your soul, no matter how much
Oh,
sleep you get,
yeah.
it doesn't matter.
If your soul is tired, sleep won't fix it. It just
And that was
won't.
it. That was
Yeah,
probably
it
it.
just it just well, I put that in my book too. Yeah. It's just like such a I really just want people to know that like sometimes sleep is indicated when the body's biological need is there, and sometimes rest, relaxation, meditation, mindfulness is warranted when your soul is tired. Like you need to rejuvenate yourself. But it's weird because people see those internal cues of sleepiness and tiredness as like one and the same, and they're so different.
Mhm.
So I think that's usually the distinction that we have to make when we're trying to figure out, do I need sleep or do I need to like feed my soul with something?
Yeah. How do we start to tell the difference? Because it's hard.
It's so hard. It's so hard. I think so for me, and everybody's so unique, but when I ask people like what what's the question that I use? It's kind of like the magic question, but not. It's like, what are you trying to change? Is kind of like the question. Like in
Mhm.
your life, if you look at your life, just take inventory, what are you trying to change?
Mhm.
Most people will say, I want to spend more time with my kids, I want to spend more time with my family. I miss, making memories, I miss having fun, I miss doing things exciting,
Yeah.
or I'm so tired that I can't do any of those things. And
Mhm.
if you're that tired, usually to me, it means that you're overworked, burnout. I mean, we live in the United States. A lot of this is out of our control, which is why
Mhm.
I mention it. But one of the first things that I ask people is that, and then if they say the things that they have to change, we kind of think about like the day, your work day, and all of that, because I noticed that people don't really give themselves enough space to just exist. They're
Yeah.
like always doing something because they have to,
Mhm.
especially if you have kids, especially if you have like pets and all that other stuff going on. But if you're able to sit in a room alone for 10 minutes a day, I feel like that is probably the most healing for your soul, just to
Mhm.
kind of take inventory, because you'll come up with ideas of like, oh yeah, I haven't done this, or my hobby, I used to love painting and I'm not doing that anymore. So your soul is like starving almost like for
Mm.
that, the things that you enjoy. Sleep is when you have those internal cues of sleepiness, like you're nodding off, like you can't even stay awake. That's when you need sleep. Um, if you're watching TV and you like can't pay attention, or you're reading a book, and unless you have, neurodivergence or ADHD, of course, if you're reading a paragraph and you have to keep reading it over and over again because you just can't get it because you're that tired, or
Mhm.
sorry, that sleepy, usually you need sleep. But if you're getting a decent amount of sleep every night and you're still tired, it's either another sleep disorder or welcome to America. Like,
Yeah.
I hate saying that, but
Yeah.
we are the most overworked country. So
Yeah. Yeah, and you've mentioned, certain things being out of our control a few times, and certainly our culture as a whole, right?
mhm,
Kids and their dependence on us,
yes, of
things like
course.
that, or if you're
Yeah,
caretaking for another family member or something.
sure.
Um, what are some of the things that are considered in our control and that we can start to get a handle on as far as improving our sleep?
Great question. So the first would be behavioral changes. So if you do a quick Google search for sleep hygiene, for most people, that's within their control. When they wake up, potentially when they go to sleep, bed opportunity windows, meaning like
Mm.
the amount of time that you have to achieve sleep. For some people, they work a couple of jobs, so that window shrinks. Our thoughts about sleep, they might feel like automatic. And the more that you challenge them, the more that you become in tune with them, in that 10 minutes of just kind of sitting, the more that you have control. Like, I think our mind is like a garden. If we don't tend to the weeds, then they just grow. And then all you see is just weeds. And you're like, oh my gosh, like, why am I depressed? It's like, well, have you looked at your mind? Have you looked inside? So that's another thing within our control. And then sometimes for people, making those behavioral changes will do it, but for some people, they'll do all those things and then they're still kind of stuck. And the reason why I bring up the sense of control so much is because just acknowledging that is powerful.
Mm.
Like, hey, I don't have control over my schedule with my kids. Just acknowledging that and coming to terms with it. I mean, it's a really hard truth and it's really difficult for people because they don't want that to be the case.
Mhm.
But really sitting with that is helpful sometimes, because then you could say, okay, I don't have full control over my schedule, but what I do have control over is, and then you could kind of find your sense of control somewhere else.
Mm.
And I say that a lot because if we could change things in the United States, and I know I'm just talking notably about the United States stuff, but if we could change the way that we view work, I don't think many people would have sleep issues, other
Yeah.
than like if you have a medical concern. But yeah, I think it's really important to focus on what you have control over too, to your point.
Mhm. I don't know. With I don't know. This could be like a whole thing, but I just I I don't know. I fight it. I fight it so hard. Like, and I
I
don't
know.
mean fight sleep once I'm in bed. I
Mhm.
fight getting into bed. Like, I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
I remember like it was like last summer or something where that um revenge bedtime
Oh, yeah.
procrastinations thing was going
Yeah.
around TikTok and things, and it was like, yeah, and on one hand, initially, it was like, "Oh, I feel like, okay, like, I'm not the only one," and then on
Yeah.
the other hand, it was, like, really encouraging. It was like, "See, everyone's doing it." I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
"Whatever," but and I go through I have to say, I go through periods of time where it's better and worse off than others, but
Mhm.
the morning me absolutely knows there is a certain time that I must be in bed by, or
Yeah.
else I'm gonna be setting up myself up, and but
Yeah.
even knowing that, I don't always do it.
That's the hard part, because I do think, first of all, just to validate, so many people have that exact same concern. And I really think that when people feel this way, it's part of it, not the whole thing, but part of it might be, am I feeding my soul throughout the day where I feel like I could get in bed, rest at night, and feel like okay about it?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Absolutely
Like,
not.
and when you think about it, when you have kids,
Yeah.
Like, it's just so hard. It's just so difficult. And, they're fun and they're funny and all that stuff too. But at the same time, you're like, oh my gosh, I have no time for myself, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, no, that's it. That's it. Yep.
Right? Yeah.
That's it. Like yesterday, Thursdays are always my hardest day. Um, my kids are home most of the day on Thursdays and they are exhausted from the different, the earlier in the week
Mhm.
they go to different schools and things like that. And they are tired. They're also getting to that point where they're a little bit sick of each other. They're a little sick of me.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm tired. And putting them to bed the whole time, I am exhausted, but
Yeah.
and I feel it because as soon as I put them to bed, it's like, I'm awake again.
Yep. Yep. And that's your time to shine, right? Most moms tell me that. It's like, and then in the therapy room, we talk about like, it is really two choices. It's let me spend some time for myself or let me go to sleep. And I mean, I think that choice could vary day to day, and that's okay. I mean, that is
Yeah.
completely okay because I think quality of life matters.
Yeah.
And if it means, hey, I'm not getting one good night of sleep this week or three good nights of sleep this week, so be it. It's temporary,
Yeah.
hopefully. But yeah,
Well,
quality of life.
I'm hearing that now that maybe maybe it's almost like I was talking to a dietitian about this of almost like rather than evaluating, what you ate on kind of a day to day, evaluate it over a 3-week period, you
Smart.
know?
Yeah.
And maybe that's what I have to start to think about the sleep thing of
Yeah.
like, and not just whether it was like quality or not, but mostly which choice am I making more often
Yeah.
over a
Totally.
3-week period,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I do want to stay up and read sometimes, or I want to, scroll
Yep.
TikTok. Like I don't got no shame. Like I want to see what's
Yeah.
going on out there. Like,
Totally.
yeah, but it's the next morning where I'm like, you jerk,
I know, right? It's like night Christy wasn't caring about the morning Christy. It's so funny. Yeah, I think the reason why I frame it as a choice, because not most I feel like not everything in life is a choice, especially when it comes to sleep stuff. But if you do have the opportunity for the choice, it gives you a little bit of sense of power in knowing like, okay, I chose this. So the next morning, if you are kind of tired, you at least know where it came from. And I
Yeah.
think people like answers. So
Okay. And you know what? I know this is probably going back, but it stuck with me. I
mhm,
saw one of your posts. I think it was TikTok. Um, and it said 5 things you wouldn't do when it comes to insomnia.
mhm,
And the two that I want to, um, well, I think we just addressed one of them was like shaming yourself into sleep.
mhm,
And I think that's a lot of what we were just talking about. Like,
totally.
I should go to sleep.
Right.
Yeah, but the other one that I resonated with was trying to match your bedtime to your partner.
Oh my gosh.
Like,
Yes.
talk to me about this because I will blame him all day long for making me
Yes.
stay up too late.
Yep. It's so hard. It's so hard when we have a bed partner or even a roommate. I mean, that it could even be that way
Yeah,
too. It's so hard because we want to be in sync and then think about like intimacy, connectedness, all those things, right? And then
yeah,
throughout the day, you don't see each other. I mean, I get it. I also think that even having your own prescribed bedtime routine, your own prescribed bedtime or wake time, whatever it is helpful. And then creating space outside of sleeping to connect. That's usually helpful for people, but it's okay to normalize that you could have a completely different bedtime routine than your partner. You could sleep in a completely different bed than your partner too,
yeah.
and you could still be madly in love.
Right. I know.
So it's okay.
Yeah, yeah. I um I do the thing where this is how. Oh my God, I can't even believe I'm gonna say this out loud because it's like I know as soon as I say it out loud, it's gonna be like, Christy,
It's
come
okay.
on, you're
We're
an
not shame.
adult,
This is
you
not a
know?
shame game. Stop it.
No, I know, but it's like my husband can function. He's like when he gets sleep, like he can sleep for 5 hours and be good for like 2 days. Like
He's one of those.
he
Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
when he sleeps hard and he's like
Yeah.
totally like a new person the next morning.
Right.
I'm not that.
Nope.
I need much more sleep. But, like, our routine of being downstairs, spending time together, watching TV, and it's always, like, the one more episode debate,
Yeah.
and then what happens actually is that I know my husband, and I know that if he doesn't go to sleep by a certain time, then he'll be up till 4 or 5 in the morning.
Got it. So he's super sensitive with his circadian rhythm, it
Yeah,
sounds
well,
like.
and then like I feel somewhat responsible for being like,
Guilty. Yeah.
yeah, because I'm like, if I go to sleep without him, if I go to sleep at 10,
Mhm.
he'll start putting on his shows or he'll start working or
Yep.
something. And then I'm like, well, then there's the chance it'll be up till 4 or 5 in the morning. And it's like,
Yep.
so if I just like stay up later with him, then I have a better chance of like getting him upstairs at the same time. It's
Exactly.
like so insane. Like
It's to be honest, this is a struggle. I cannot tell you how common this is. Like I promise, it's
okay.
so common. It's when people are partnered, and I struggle with it too with my partner. I even last night, perfect example. I was so tired, Christy. It was like 9:30. I was exhausted. I just had such a long day, and he was on a different sleep schedule than me. He woke up a little later than me yesterday, so he was still kind of awake. And I'll literally ask him, "Do you have the internal cues of sleepiness?" He's like, "Can you just ask me if I'm tired? Like, stop using the terms." I'm like, "Okay, I'll just ask if you're tired next time." But he wasn't. So in my mind, I had that same struggle of like, I literally want to spend more time with this man, but I literally need to go to sleep. And I
Yeah.
didn't know what to do. And then I kept thinking the same thing. If I go into my bed, he's going to be up. And then what if he's up until 1 a.m. or something? That's not my problem.
I
Right.
know.
But good, we care. We care so
I
much,
know.
so it's hard.
Well, and selfishly, just to really finish this thought out, selfishly, I know when he has those nights, unfortunately, because they happen, probably once every 2 weeks where he is up
Mhm.
till 4 or 5 in the morning. I feel so bad the next day about being like,
Mhm.
hey, it's time to put the kids to bed. Like, come help me because he's
Yeah,
ready for bed. So, like, selfishly, I want him to sleep so that he can help me
totally.
and I don't feel bad about it.
100%. That's also that's definitely part of the equation though, because think about it. If he's not getting enough sleep, right? He's inevitably going to be tired and then roles and responsibilities, they shift.
Yeah.
And then you have to do more, right? Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. And what if you're tired? What if you had a bad day? What if something happened? Then
Yeah.
it's like we don't have like a plan B here, which is hard. So I think sleep is protective in that way too, of like if you get enough sleep or you're sleeping well or you have quality sleep, that it will set you up for the next day. I don't know many people who regret having a good night's sleep. I mean,
I
I
know.
just don't. I just
I
don't,
know. Yeah, I know. I know.
Yeah.
I know.
I know it's
Um,
so hard. It's so
I
hard.
know. I know. All right. So talk to me a little bit about are there ways that we are knowingly or better yet, maybe unknowingly like sabotaging our sleep?
Yes, absolutely. So the one thing that comes to mind is the scrolling in bed. The scrolling at night, it's is one thing. The scrolling in bed is another. And I say that
Yeah.
because our minds are so quick with these things to make correlations and to make pairs. So for
Mhm.
example, have you heard of Pavlov and the dogs and that experiment?
Yes.
For the listeners there who don't know, Pavlov was a psychologist and he basically wanted to train dogs to salivate based on a bell rather than based on seeing food. So he paired the bell with the food and the dog started to salivate eventually without seeing the food. They just heard the bell and they were like salivating as if they were about to eat, but there was no presence of food. Our brain is the same way with our bed and sleep.
Mm.
So if we get into bed, our brain already knows this is where we relax, this is where we sleep, this is where we just pass out. When we start introducing things into the bed that aren't supposed to be bedtime things or sleep things, then our brain starts to attach to those things and say, oh, this is where we think about all those embarrassing moments from 10 years ago, or where we think about the fight with our husband, or we think about our
Mhm.
taxes. Gosh, I have to, all those things. So if you're doing things in bed and just say you're not even doing anything, but your mind is going, that's a good indication to me that your brain is thinking that the bed is not for relaxation or rest, it's for something else.
Mm.
So this is one thing that is really hard for people because our beds are comfortable. Some people don't have the opportunity to relax in another area. Maybe they have a studio apartment, they
Right.
don't have a couch, or they're living with family or friends or something like that. So any way that you can shift is helpful. So for the people out there who don't have an opportunity to have a couch or another chair, I say harm reduction. Whenever you're scrolling, go on the other side of the bed or go
Mm.
backwards or upside down. It's something like that,
Mhm.
just to indicate to your mind, like just some difference. It's not
Yeah.
ideal, but it's better than nothing. And then if you're able to just exit your room and only go in when you have those internal cues of sleepiness, like you're literally nodding off.
Mhm.
They say if we just use the bed for sleep and then intimacy, those are two big things that
Mhm.
should just stay in the bed. For that reason, I always suggest people don't have a TV in their room. I know that's like a big debate. Oh my gosh, I can't ever do that, or something like that. But that's one thing that we do a lot that sabotages our sleep that a lot of people don't realize. So having your bedroom as like a sacred place, it doesn't have to be spiritual by any means, but a sacred place that helps you sleep, dim lights, calm stuff. If you look at your room, what is in there that is stressful? Do you have your laptop in there? Do you have paperwork from work? Like what else is in there that might even trigger you to think about stress? Because we want that. We don't want to have any reminders of stress.
Okay. Are you a person who does not charge your phone by your bed?
I used to be really bad about this, and I've gotten really good probably 2 years ago. So, I would always have I would do all the bad sleep strategies, honestly. Even specializing in sleep, I'm like, "It doesn't matter. It makes such a big difference." So I used to have my phone by my bed. Now I have my phone in my office. I work from home, and I have a sunrise alarm. I don't even wake up to noise anymore.
Mhm.
So you just wake up to the light because the light is the thing that regulates things for us. It stops melatonin secretion when we see light. So if you're waking up and you have that gradual sunrise alarm instead of like a noise on your phone, because your phone's a reminder of all the other things you have to do, you'll just wake up naturally in a different way. It's more
Mm.
calming.
Mhm. Why, like, is it just, this is where I have to like watch myself because I'll get really hard on myself, but it's like, well, it just doesn't seem like some of these things, like the phone out of the room, or even just the
Mhm,
light, or just, like when you were saying what's in your bedroom, like I can picture at times, a little stack of paperwork on
mhm,
my nightstand, which
mhm.
is stressful for me.
Sure.
But why is it so hard? Like, they're not that hard. They're
I
easy to
know.
do, but why is it like such a pain in the butt? Like, I don't
It
know.
sucks. It
Why?
sucks because
But
because
why?
I'm with you.
Why?
I'm totally with you because I think it feels so small. So people think, what difference will it actually make?
Mm,
And is this really that bad? Like, I think people tend to minimize like situations. So,
yeah.
and they don't give themselves enough credit, which I'm noticing a pattern.
Oh, yeah.
Self-compassion goes a long way. But yeah, I mean, I think our brains too, when it comes to sleep, we're still really reptilian in that way.
Mhm.
So just for an example, the suprachiasmatic nucleus is in our hypothalamus. It's really tiny. It regulates our circadian rhythms, and there's multiple circadian rhythms. Sleep is one of them, and it's regulated by consistency and exposure to light. That's it. Just two things. Consistency is waking up at the exact same time every day, so melatonin secretion stops at a certain time. And then when we expose ourselves to light, melatonin secretion stops, and then it starts this whole process of, oh, we're awake. Cool. We don't have to tell our brains, hey, we're awake. It already knows just based on these things. And our eyes could be closed. We could still take in light. So if there's two things that people are like, oh gosh, I just don't know what else to do. The most natural thing you could do for yourself is wake up to light, in my opinion, if you have the opportunity to do so. And just to wake up at the same time every day, even if you had a really bad night's sleep and stuff. Again, it's all a choice, like, in terms of like your
Mhm.
own body. Everybody's an expert on their own body, but
Okay. All right. All right.
I know it sucks. Even I fight it.
Yeah.
This morning I like saw the light come up and I was like laying there and I was like, "Oh, why?" Like I said
Yeah.
that out loud.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And the one other thing I wanted to ask you about with that is, I notice about, like, with my cycle, like, my
Mhm.
sleep
Oh
gets
yeah.
messed up. Like,
Oh.
it doesn't matter the week to 10 days before my period. It doesn't matter how many hours of sleep I get.
Mhm.
I wake up like a ton of bricks. Like,
Oh, totally.
it sucks.
I know. I
It's like,
actually have the same issue. Seriously. It's so debilitating and it's so aggravating because you
yeah.
can't control it, right? It's like, oh gosh, come on. But if you really take a step back and you think about this, right? I think we've gotten so used to our bodily processes.
Mhm.
And when you really, really think about this, when your body is going through a cycle, menstruation, there are so many things happening.
I know.
Like when you
Yeah.
when you when you actually go, I had to actually Google it to like remind myself like what actually happens because your body is changing so much and it requires a lot of sleep. It just
Mhm.
does. We're
Yeah.
tired, we're grumpy, all those things for a really good reason. But I think we're just so used to it that we don't realize the impact of these things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's annoying. It's
It
frustrating.
is. It really is. I hear you on that one.
Normally this like
No,
just
I'm with
like
you. To
it's
be honest with you,
ugh,
I'm glad we're talking about it because it normalizes what other people are probably experiencing and feeling. And everything that you're telling me is things that people tell me in the therapy room. Like, I am so frustrated. I'm so
yeah.
aggravated. Like, why is this an issue? Why can't I just do the thing I need to do? Well, life is really complicated and we're
Yeah.
humans and humans are complicated. We have a lot of things going on and we're all very unique in different ways. And the things that we love and the things that we enjoy, the things that bring us, a sense of safety. We're all so different.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that unfortunately, of when I said earlier I can't work on everything all at once,
Hmm.
this it's funny because the ones that present themselves to me actively, the things that I need to work on and that I
Hmm.
want to work on that present themselves like throughout the day are there in my face.
Yeah.
Whereas this one, even though the repercussions of it show up all day long,
Yeah.
it's not the actual act.
It's so
I'm not
different.
faced with a decision. I've been like on this whole like body image, food situation for a while now.
Hmm.
And it's like that I'm constantly working on all day because I have to eat every day
Right.
and I
You
have
have
to
to look
eat
in the
all day
mirror.
long.
Yep.
And it's always in
Yep.
my face. And
Yep.
my parenting and what I have to work on there is always in my face because my kids are always at my feet and my husband's
Yes.
always coming home and I got to do my marriage thing. And so it's like, ba,
It's
ba,
so
ba, ba,
true.
ba. And then like,
Yeah.
it's like finally you're like, okay, oh, and now I got to go to sleep.
It's
That's the
so
last
you
thing.
it's literally the last thing people think about, and I think it's because early on, the theories about sleep, most of the theories were that sleep is a passive process, and it's not, and I think a
Mm,
lot of us still might think that, like,
yeah.
"Oh, sleep is just something we do,"
Yeah.
and it is, that's true, and it's so, so incredibly crucial for our health, and we don't have many reminders throughout the day other than, "Tired, I have a headache, I'm grumpy," like, those
Yeah.
things, which you could attribute those to, like, anything
Yeah.
literally my cycle, hormones, anything. So
Yeah.
I'm with you. I think if it's not in your face, then it's hard. So it's almost like you have to be very conscious of it. And to
Yeah.
be conscious takes effort, and then effort is exhausting. So I know why people might not want to do this. It makes sense to me.
Yeah. All right. So let's just remind everyone before I ask you kind of like the last, couple of things. Let's remind I feel like I have the feeling like I've made the sleep conversation a little more negative than I want to leave
Mhm,
it.
mhm.
So remind us perhaps of the greatness of sleep, or if there's
Yeah,
anything, kind of that that I haven't thought to ask about that is like critical to all of this that makes me, get us back to little sunshine and roses here.
totally, totally. Yeah, yeah. No, I'm really glad that we've talked up until this point about all those other things, though, because those are very important. When I think about sleep and the benefits and the beauty of sleep, if you think about evolution, how we've evolved so much over time, we still share this part of ourselves with our ancestors. It's very, very, very ingrained in us. And I think just from a historical perspective, sleep is something that we are just, it's just part of us. It's not something that's going to change over time. It might change in terms of like the hours that we might need if I could anticipate, but it's something that we share throughout humanity and even with other animals. So it's just something that we all do. When I think about the benefits of sleep, if you look 10 years ahead in your life and you picture where you want to be, you're not going to be the most ideal version of yourself if you don't get sleep. You're just not going to. And not only because you're too exhausted to do the things that you have to do, but your body is going to take the toll. And what I mean by that is when we have short sleep, which is sleep that's under 6 hours, just say chronically for like decades, just say, um, cardiovascular health, muscle tone, memory consolidation, cognitive functioning, attention concentration, all of these things, creativity, all these things are plummeted when you don't get good sleep.
Mhm.
And for some people, they could function off of 6 hours or less, and that's great. But that's less than 1% of the population could actually do that. So I think if you think about the grand scheme of humans, optimal functioning is better than just functioning.
Yeah, I was
So
just thinking like
exactly.
functioning versus actually
Yeah.
restoring and all the things, you
I
know?
love that. I love that you said restoring because that's the whole process. Like sleep, sleep is restorative. It's not for relaxation. And I think people confuse the two when they're so
Mm.
burnt out. They're like, I just want to sleep. Well, your body needs to restore a lot of things. It metabolism. I mean, Christy, the list goes on and on. So I think if you're really, really thinking about your sleep and what it's helpful for, if you want to be the best version of yourself, you're going to need to focus on it. It's just inevitable. Every really, really, really big CEO and people who like make all these
Yeah.
great strides in life, a lot of them focus on sleep now in their later years because when they were hustling, they had no time. And now they're seeing the repercussions of the lack of sleep. So if there's one thing that you could do for yourself, it might be focusing small. Let me try one new sleep habit a month and just
Yeah.
keep it at that. Let me try
Yeah.
to wake up at the same time every day, or let me try to, read with my kids at night instead of being on my phone with them. Like anything
Yeah.
you could do would be helpful.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I could do that. I could do one thing. I could do one
Yeah,
small
yeah.
thing.
What it all it takes is one single step. You like who said it? I think it was like Martin Luther King. Like, you don't focus on the whole staircase, you focus on the first step.
Mm,
And that's all you have to focus on. It's really, really ingrained habits take time, and self-compassion goes a long way. It's okay.
I know. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So I want to switch gears a bit. Being on social media, you've got a podcast now. Like, was that an intentional decision to join social media? How did that go?
I feel like everything in my life is haphazard now that I'm talking to you. No, I downloaded TikTok as a joke.
Okay.
I guess at least I know that, like, if it's happening, maybe it's intentional afterwards. But no, I downloaded TikTok November 2020, October 2020 as a joke. And I was like, I was bored during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I was on there and I was seeing all these mental health content creators. They were putting out such amazing content. And I was like, I gotta maybe just try. I downloaded TikTok. I made one video, Christy, on cognitive distortions. It was like the worst video I've ever made in my life. It was like I was stuttering, I had like worse lighting. I said the same thing twice. Like, it was just like a whole hot mess. But I blew up from that one video.
Mm,
And I had 50K followers, like, seemingly overnight. I think it took like 3 days. And then I just put out more content. I eventually started to put out sleep content, and that's kind of where it really took off, because people were like, oh my God, I don't know how to sleep.
yeah.
I'm like, wow, people don't have this information. That's insane to me. Like, people don't have access to sleep information.
Yeah.
So that's where it started.
Okay. And on one hand, I feel like, wow, cool. On the other hand, I feel like, kind of blowing up overnight is like, oh, now I have followers. Now I need to make more stuff. Like,
That's how I felt. Yeah, that's how
oh,
I felt. I was like, oh my goodness. Like, I
yeah.
just, like, didn't know what to do. And, like, I didn't have anybody in this space at that time where I could talk to. Like, I had no
Mm,
social media friends, so I was like talking to my colleagues, and everybody has a different view about social media when you're a mental health professional. So a lot of them were like, oh my gosh, that's great. And a lot of them were like, oh my gosh, that's scary. Like, so I
yeah.
was getting all these mixed signals of like, what do I do? And then I ended up starting to reach out to people. I think Dr. Jess Rabin, I don't know if you've, Jess Lee, PhD. I reached out to her first, and we actually became great friends. We did the podcast together now, but I reached out to her and I was like, I literally need help. I will pay you. Like, I seriously need guidance. Like,
Yeah.
and we talk with each other now, but about ethics and making sure that everything out there is good. But it was a really weird start, I think,
Yeah.
for me.
I just have to say it's funny because I didn't at first react to her name because that's not her handle,
I
is
know,
it?
I know. It's not her handle. Yeah. It's so
Like,
funny.
I don't know that name.
Who
I
is
was like
that?
shocked. I'm like, I know like all the OG like therapists out there, and I'm like,
Yeah,
huh. And then as soon as you said podcast, I was like, oh, because that's not her handle.
exactly. That's so funny. I'm going to lead with handles now, because I think people will actually, now that you say that, that's probably better, because people on
July
social media,
interviewer. Yeah,
yeah,
July interviewer. She doesn't really have a real name.
she's not a real person. Like,
Just
yeah,
she's just her handle.
yeah, that's it.
That's funny. All right. Well, and so you know, I notice in your content, it seems that you do, you self-disclose quite a bit, and
Mhm,
you often I have noticed too that you talk to your colleagues in
mhm,
your content, which I think is really cool. Um, but you're right, like not everybody goes there. Like,
mhm.
do you have kind of your own, code of ethics, or like how do you keep what are your boundaries with that, and how do you keep yourself in line with them?
That's such a good question. I love talking about this. So, for ethics for mental health professionals, or even like any healthcare professional that you see on social media, we all have our own ethics codes, and depending on the license, they're all going to look different.
Mm,
So, for clinical psychologists, we have the APA ethics code, and I think was it 2017 or 2018. They shared their thoughts on ethics and social media, and basically like making sure that you're not doing therapy with
mm,
people on social media, like on a live or in a video. The second thing would be is to just like present yourself as, professional, and only the things that your clients want to see. And the third major takeaway is like, don't exploit people. Like, just that,
mm.
honestly, to be honest with you, like the bare basics, in my opinion.
Yeah, like just be
So
nice.
it'd be nice, yeah. So I
Don't be
rely on my
stupid.
ethic. Exactly, exactly. Be nice, don't be stupid. I love that. Yeah, that's like
Yeah.
literally the title of it, right? But when I go back in my ethics code, there's nothing in there like the traditional ethics code that says how clinical psychologists should actually specifically conduct themselves on social media. So for me, I only post what I would be okay with a client seeing. I
Mhm.
only post what I'm comfortable staying on the internet forever. Like
Mhm.
just say
Mhm.
somebody downloads it or something. And the third is I really, really try to be as human as possible because I think that people get a highlight reel of what things might look like. And
Mhm.
I have tattoos, like I don't look like the typical psychologist. I mean, in 2023 I do, but for people who
Mhm.
might not be inundated with the psychology field, I do look a little alternative. So I do think really breaking the stigmas down all the while holding up your ethics is a delicate balance, and it's something that we have to do.
Mhm.
But I don't provide advice, specific advice. I don't, I sometimes provide suggestions for people. And with sleep, it's like a little easier because sleep is something that we all do.
Yeah.
For specific diagnoses, it gets a little more nuanced.
Mhm.
So
Mhm. Anything about now being a a public figure, if you will, and like out there with everybody everybody watching, who's everybody? I
yeah,
don't know, but you know what I mean.
right. Yeah, yeah.
Has anything really surprised you, caught you off guard about the experience or something that you wouldn't have expected?
Yeah, actually, nobody's ever asked me that question, Christy. Yeah. The one thing that I never realized was how do I word this? Was how I guess it's two things, like how much people were actually struggling
Mm,
because clinical psychologists, like we only have obviously the research and like we could look at a research number and say, oh, okay, good to know. But when people are coming in our therapy room, we see it,
mm,
and you only see a certain amount of clients. So you think like, okay, the population of people struggling might not be as big as I think it is. And I was completely wrong.
mm,
You could look at the numbers all day, but there's so many people commenting like, oh my God, I struggle with sleep and like I'm struggling. And the second thing is, I didn't have thick skin when it came to social media. So there's a lot of people out there who, are struggling with their own things and they project and they make mean comments and stuff. And in the beginning, it really sent me because I was like you, body shape, weight, self-image, self-esteem, self-worth. Those are all things I used to struggle with pretty badly. And now when I see a comment, I'm like, I have thick skin about it. It's easy to let it roll. But in the beginning, Christy, I was like, I would overthink things for weeks. Like
mm,
I would see a comment and overthink it for weeks, like, oh, maybe I should take that as feedback, or like, what should I do? But I've come up with like a calculation in my mind. Like if it's not another therapist or healthcare professional or a professional in general, that feedback is helpful, but it might not be feedback that I need to implement. Like if it's
mm.
user 698, whatever, with
Yeah,
no profile picture and no
right.
content, I might take it a little more lightly. But I was taking every single comment as like, oh my gosh, I have to change my life. So being on display like that is different. But the beautiful thing that's happening, which I'm really excited, I'm getting chills, is I feel like I found a newfound sense of confidence in myself by
Mm,
just kind of working through these things. So it's been really healing for me as well.
yeah. Yeah. Any advice for, your colleagues listening or anyone on social media listening who is in that beginning phase of having thinner skin?
Yeah, yeah. I guess two things. The first would be really coming up with an idea of what your goal might be with social media. And it could just be, hey, I just want to put this out for education so that you kind of know why you're doing it. Because sometimes if you don't have the why, it just kind of feels heavy sometimes. And then the second thing would be to really come up with an idea of what feels right for you in terms of how you word things on social media. The delivery is everything. So I notice that at least me and my colleagues have the most issues with if we see somebody saying only, always, never, like to talk about certain diagnoses, like, or
Yeah.
they're really like black and white about things, but because humans are so complex,
Yeah.
just because somebody has ADHD doesn't mean that same person will experience it the same way.
Yeah.
So saying like, this is my experience, or this is a suggestion, or people might experience this, because we have to be really nuanced when we're talking to this population because people are so vulnerable and they're dealing with a lot of stuff. So
Yeah. I mean, I obviously my all of my algorithms across every platform, it's like therapist, 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 coach,
yeah,
coach,
yeah.
coach, all the things.
Yes.
And or just people out there. That's the other thing I have to watch is like, am I
Mm,
watching a therapist or am I just watching a person share their
exactly.
experience? Because
Yeah.
there got to a point where I was like, do I have ADHD?
Right,
Like,
right, right.
do I? Because it's and I know that there are a lot of people, I've talked to them that saw videos like that and went to a professional and got an
Yeah.
assessment and learned that they did, and their whole life has changed for the better, and it's this.
Yes.
But then there's other situations where, I have a psychiatrist, I have a therapist, and they're both
Mhm.
looking at me like, "You do not have ADHD, like, stop." But
Oh
it's
my gosh.
like, yeah, you start to get a
Yeah.
little, like, in your head about stuff when you
You
see it
do.
over and over and over and over again. It's like,
You
wiggy.
do. You do. No, you do. And I think you described it so beautifully of like the nuance with it and how it could go either way. Because I think when people are seeing these things, they want to be able to explain what's going on with themselves.
Yeah,
You want answers. That's really what people want. I want to know what's going on with me. And I think for my clients who come to me with a TikTok and say, "Oh my gosh, this is relatable," I always say, "Thank you for showing me. What else?
yeah,
Show me what else," because that TikTok or that meme or that something might be able to describe something that they can't put into words. And to
yeah,
me, it's very useful in the therapy session. Where there might be issues is if people are attached to a diagnosis, because
yeah.
differential diagnosis for us psychologists, like we look at every other diagnosis it possibly could be. Then
Mm,
we come up with one. And I know lay people don't have access to that. So they might think, oh, it's ADHD. It might be something else. We
yeah,
don't really know. So I think it's useful and it could also be unhelpful depending on how you use it.
yeah, and who it's coming from. Like, that's the bigger
Exactly.
thing. It's like, who is
That's
saying
another good
this?
point.
And what authority
Yeah.
do they have? What education do they have? It's like,
Yeah.
okay,
And that's a good point too, Christy,
look at
because I
it.
think even when you look at therapists, we are all trained so differently. So I
Yeah,
always suggest that people look at licensing. So like clinical psychologists have different training than like master's level social workers, and they have different training than like NPs, because that's a completely different field, and DOs and MDs. Like we all have different training. So you could get something from everybody, but it might not be the same across
mhm,
the board.
okay. All right, and, the last thing I wanna ask you about is your book. I saw
Oh,
that you got
thanks.
the unboxing recently. Is it
Yeah.
available for sale?
It's
What's
available.
going on?
Thank you for asking.
Of
Yeah, it's
course.
available for pre-order. It drops during Sleep Awareness Week next week. It's
Oh,
daylight savings time. I don't know when you'll drop this, but March 14th is when it's going to be released. So yeah, it's on pre-order right now. I talk a lot about the things that we kind of discussed today, in addition to how do we handle the stress and the things that we can't control. I think that's a lot of kind of where I lead, because that's where people have the most issues. But yeah, it's really fun. And I'm a little unhinged as a human, and it kind of comes out in the book. So it's a fun read. It's not like boring. People are like, "This is going to put me to sleep." I'm like, "Well, I hope so. And also I hope not, because I want you to
right.
get the information." So I had to kind of strike a balance there, but it was a really fun, process,
Okay.
so yeah,
Cool. And I do imagine by when this airs, it will be actually released. So
great.
would it be your website, Amazon? Like, where is it available?
Yeah. If you're on
Where will it be
Instagram,
available?
yeah, if you're on Instagram, I have a link in my bio. Otherwise you could just Google my name and just put book after it and it'll pop
Okay.
up. It's called The
Okay.
Insomnia Doc's Guide to Restful Sleep.
Cool. Cool. And you have the podcast going still?
Yeah, it's called Welcome to Group Therapy.
Welcome to group.
So it's not therapy, but we take questions from our listeners and we answer them in a very generalized way so that everybody could kind of reap the benefits of those questions. And we have so much fun with the podcast. It's the same vibe as I'm getting with you. It's just like really easy and fun. And we have like deep conversations and we could laugh and we could, it's a really nice range of what we
Yeah.
experience and talk about. So
Yeah, I've listened to a couple of episodes. It's very good.
yeah,
You
yeah.
guys do a
Thank
great
you.
job. So, I will link all of the things in the show notes. In the meantime, Dr. Kristen Casey, is there anything? Well, I know you now. I can call you Kristen or Dr.
You're so
Kristen.
funny.
Um,
Everybody does it. It's okay.
is there anything, just from this conversation or anything lingering on your mind, heart, soul that you want to make sure to say today before we sign off?
Yeah, yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for having me on. I am like a binge listener of your podcast, so it's really fun. I love it. You talk about great things. You're so knowledgeable and humble and kind and compassionate. So thank you
Oh my
for even
gosh,
just putting
thank you
this out
so
there.
much.
Yeah, people need to hear what you have to say. So thanks for being in this space. And yeah, the second thing would be if you are struggling with sleep and you feel a lot of shame about it, really kind of looking inward and just like again, just doing one good thing for yourself a day. I technically see sleep as self-care. If there's
Mhm.
one thing you could do for yourself, just try to focus on sleep. And it doesn't have to be anything wild.
Right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for
Thanks.
being
Thanks
here.
so much. Loved it.
Okay, so three really important, incredible takeaways for me from this conversation. The first is if your soul is tired, sleep won't fix it. I feel this deeply, whether it be because of a bout of depression or just burnout. Oh, and my soul is tired. My soul, when I'm struggling, when I'm overwhelmed, when I'm just really fixated on an area of personal growth that I just cannot get through, I am so tired, and it does not seem to matter how much sleep I get. And I also notice this, if I'm having a tough day with my kids, I'll get really, really tired. And then as soon as they're all tucked into bed and totally fine and the house is quiet, all of a sudden I'm not so tired and I get my second win. So I feel this deeply, and I appreciated her validating that. The second is sleep is restorative, not relaxation. I don't often think about what sleep actually does for my body. I only ever really think about sleep in relation to how I feel the next morning, whether it's tired or not tired. And sleep really does so much more than, determine whether we're tired or not. All of your body functions are doing all the things they're doing while we're sleeping. And it is not a time to unwind. It's really a time to restore. And the distinction there is that we also need time to unwind. We also actually need the relaxation. They're two separate things. Restoration and relaxation are two separate things, and we need both. And the third thing is really starting to make myself aware of looking at sleep and my choices around sleep over perhaps a week-long period or a 2-week-long period, rather than on a day-by-day basis. Because really, when I have made this transition in any other aspect of my life, whether it be with exercise, water intake, nutrition, I feel generally calmer about the situation and am able to take a little bit more pride in my decisions and also leave room for life to happen. So I really got a lot out of this. Dr. Kristen Casey, I appreciate you so much. Go check her out on Instagram, on TikTok, get her book. She's awesome. I know you'll hear from her again on this show. And that's all I've got. I'll see you next time. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Sass Says is a production of Luann Nigara, Inc. This podcast is meant to be educational and not meant to replace professional therapy or professional medical attention. To learn more about today's show and what's new in my world, head over to sasssays.com. Thanks so much. Talk later.